परिपूर्णगुणार्णवाय विश्वोदयस्थितिलयो नियतिप्रदाय ज्ञानप्रदाय विबुधासुरसौख्यदुःखसत्कारणाय वितताय नमो नमस्ते। आसीदुदारगुणवारिधिरप्रमेय नारायणः परतमः परमात्म एकः संशान्तसंवितचिदं जठरे निधाय लक्ष्मीभुजान्तरगतः स्वरतोऽपि च तस्योदरस्थजगतः सदमन्दसान्द्रस्वानन्दतुष्टवपुषोऽपि रमारमस्य भूत्यै निजाश्रितजनस्य हि सुज्यसुष्टा वीक्षा बभूव परनामनिमेषकान्ते। ॐ नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरये। महत्त्वाद्भारवत्वाच्च महाभारतमुच्यते निरुक्तमस्य यो वेद सर्वपापैः प्रमुच्यते यदि हास्तितदं यत्र यन्नेहास्ति न कुत्रचित्। ॐ देवं नारायणं नत्वा सर्वदोषविवर्जितं परिपूर्णं गुरुं गीतार्थं वक्ष्यामि देशतः। लक्ष्मीनारायणं नत्वा पूर्णबोधान् गुरूनपि कुर्मः श्रीकृष्णगीतायाः भाष्यादुक्तार्थसङ्ग्रहम्। Hari Om. Welcome everyone. This is the weekly once Pratipadartha Chandrika room. We try to derive or we try to look at the word by word breakdown of the Gita shloka, and we try to make as much literal sense as possible for these words, and also maybe look at what could be a couple of potential derived interpretations we can draw, not necessarily concluding that this is the way we have to understand Gita, or that particular way is the way we have to understand Gita, because Gita we know very well. It's a very, very amorphous scripture, mightily amorphous scripture, where whatever sankalpa we take to and approach Gita with, the Gita has the tendency to amplify our emotions in a multi-fold way and throw it back at us in a much more refined, in a much more clearer, in a much more with a lot more clarity, the way we can think of. I mean, if we are from the marketing background, and when we take to Gita, Gita will throw us more insights from the marketing side. So what we try to do is that a couple of things under the Purushottama Yoga. Now, Purushottama Yoga is the 15th adhyaya of the Bhagavad-Gita. Dedicated, this club is dedicated primarily for Bhagavad-Gita. So we meet every morning to do the Samuhika Parayana, the group recitation, where we expect ourselves to get better with the clearer pronunciation of the shloka. And that's essential. That's the first step. The more and more clearer we get, we know that these words are our own words. Samskrita words are pretty much there in every Bharatiya Bhasha. And that is what we try to bank upon. My voice is clear.
It was breaking in between just last statement.
We try to do this daily Parayana, where we try to get better with the recitation. The more clearer the pronunciation, the better we are able to locate the real words in the shloka. And that's very, very essential. Many of us, what we do otherwise is we gloss over the English translations or any other regional language translation. And in many such instances, we are not really getting the words of Gita Charya properly. We are getting the words of the commentator or the translator. And every translation will have its own set of limitations. No translation will be ever devoid of limitations. And this is the reason why when we started one of the Mangala shlokas, we say, Gita Artham Vakshyami Deshavaha. There is only little we can speak of the Artha Chintana of the Gita. There is no way anybody can speak the Purnataha Gita Artha. Right? So that's the Mangala shloka given to us by Acharya Madhva, where it's an upfront declaration that whatever little Chintana we do, we will only be able to do Leshataha Artha Chintana, only a little bit. And to that extent, what we try to do is get to understand the word by word understanding of the Gita shloka. And then the more we contemplate with the basic understanding of the words, with the basic empowerment of the clarity of the words and the basic understanding, the deeper meanings are bound to unravel multifold in all our lives. It's a known testimony from many, many people, both great as well as ordinary people, like me. Every time we read Gita, it throws open a new dimension to, us, depending on perhaps because of the recent incident in our lives. Right? So that's what we try to do. So far, we have covered till the 13th shloka of the 6th chapter. Now, 6th chapter is nothing new. It's an extension to the 5th chapter. Right? There is no special question. There is no special interrogation. There is no special inquiry happening from Arjuna. Arjuna's question is still the same. What we are addressed, but what we are getting to hear being addressed by Krishna is the question that was posed by Arjuna at the beginning of the fifth chapter. Right? At the beginning of the fifth chapter, Arjuna's question is very simple. Hey Krishna, you praise sannyasa and you also praise yoga, karma yoga, nishkama karma yoga. Tell me which is the better among the two. Right? Is it yoga better, karma yoga better, or sannyasa better? Now, sannyasa can be understood in a couple of ways, right? In our ashrama dharma, we also have something called the sannyasa ashrama, the vanaprastha ashrama. Perhaps Arjuna is thinking that an early sannyasa ashrama, I mean, again, he is not a 20-year-old, right? At the time of the war, he has a 16-year-old son, right? At the time of the war, he is around his 40s. Arjuna is around his 40s, right? So none of them are young. Okay, maybe he's looking at a very early retirement of sannyasa. Krishna very clearly clarifies the first few slokas of the fifth adhyaya is sannyasa is always yoga yukta sannyasa. The sannyasa that he spoke of towards the end of the fourth adhyaya, that is where the confusion arises for Arjuna, right? No, yoga sanyasta karmanam jnana sanchinna samshayam. The last couple of slokas of fourth adhyaya is the appears to be is the trigger for Arjuna to ask this question. Tell me which is better, sannyasa or karma, right? So Krishna very clearly, in as many simple, straightforward ways as possible, explains that sannyasa is yoga yukta sannyasa. If you are ayogataha, if you are looking at sannyasa without any yoga, without any karma, it is dukkha kara. He explains that very clearly. Why do we then need to take the sankalpa, be prepared for renunciation when we are doing karma? It is for Brahmani Adhini, like Brahmanyadaya Karmani. The 10th sloka explains why do we have to do yoga yukta sannyasa. Then from the 10th sloka, the fifth adhyaya, the fifth chapter, we get to see a section which is predominantly explaining something called the Brahmi Sthiti, Brahma Vishaya Sthiti, Brahma Prapika Sthiti according to Ramanuja, Brahma Vishaya Sthiti according to Acharya Madhva, Brahmani Bhuyaha Ayam Sthiti, Brahmi Sthiti according to Shankara, Adi Shankara Bhagavad-Gita. No, the same word can be looked at or interpreted differently by different acharyas, but what Krishna says is do everything for the sake of Brahma. Those 10, 12 slokas explain very clearly what is Brahmicity from the words of Gita Acharya, Bhagavad Sri Krishna. We do things for the sake of being under the aegis of Bhagavan Sri Krishna. And kayena manasa buddhya kevalaiindriyeti yoginaha karma kuruvanti sangam tektva atma shuddhaye. Why we do that brahmanyadhaya yoga yukta sannyasa kind of a work? For the sake of atma shuddhi. The only way we can understand our true potential is forget every other objective, every other motive around us. Just keep doing the vihita karma, no matter whether it is appearing to be in our favor or not. We have to just keep performing our vihita karma, because the more and more karma we do, that is when we realize what we are truly capable of. And that's the true way of understanding our own self, and that's the true way of realizing the self. Self-realization is by karma. Do more and more and more, whether it is something that is naturally attractive for us or not. Right? So, Atma Shuddhaye Sangam Tyaktva Yoginaha Karma Kuruvanti. How? Kayena Manasa Buddhya Kevalaihi Indriyehi. And Kevala is a very good word, right? Kaivalya comes from Jnana. Jnanena to Kaivalya. But Kevala is a very good word. From the point of view of even moksha, many people draw that Kevala. That is around the 11th sloka of the fifth adhyaya, fifth chapter. The 11th sloka mentions this. And then goes on to explain more and more about, the way of the Brahmicity, where, Kama Krodho Bhavam Begam, like, Ihaiva, here only, in this birth only, before the death, before we give up this body, we have to overcome the turbulence that is caused by Kama Krodha, which is the Rajogunatmaka samsara. It is filled with Kama Krodha. One who can overcome that, he is the one who can be Sukha, and that is in the state of Brahmicity. And the more and more we look at the Brahmicity, it is more of a Bahiranga Shuddhi. We are controlling ourselves from an external Avayava perspective. We are not really looking at internalizing that, right? Including the sloka where he says finally in sloka number 20, I think, in the fifth adhyaya, Natra Hrishyet Priyam Prapya, don't get up in joy, don't jump up in joy whenever something nice happens to us. Na apriyam prapya udvije, and don't get dejected, when get something not so desirous. In our karma, when we do relentless karma, there are the fruits of the karma, the end result can be either desirous or not desirous. That's logical, right? Don't jump up in joy if you get something desirous, and don't get dejected if you get not desirous. Just keep doing, you know, keep doing for the sake of atma shuddhi, and stay that equanimous, right? And that is the point onward from which Krishna starts explaining the antaranga shuddhi. So the fifth adhyaya towards the end, it gives the broad markers around the antaranga shuddhi. We can perhaps call it as the Brahma Yoga Yukti. The Brahma Yoga Yuktatma Sukhamakshayam Ashtati, right? That's the sloka number 21 or something like that, from the fifth adhyaya. From then on, we get drawn into the antaranga shuddhi. And that is where, towards the end of the fifth adhyaya, it says the the chief thinking, the chief thought that we need to keep on internalizing within ourselves is that Bhagavad Tattva, Bhoktaram Yajna Tapasam Sarvaloka Maheshwaram, the one who is the eventual consumer of all the yajna and tapas, and the one who is truly the supreme lord of all the worlds, and the one who is is kind-hearted friend inside each one's heart, Sudurgam Sarva Bhutanam. Iti jnatva shanti vrichiti. Once we realize that, internalize that thought, we will attain shanti. But he doesn't say how to internalize. That dharana as a procedure is explained in the Dhyana Yoga. Now, when we see Dhyana Yoga, even in the Ashtanga Yoga perspective, the state of samadhi, the last three steps towards samadhi, is that dharana, dhyana, then samadhi. So you have a thought, you have that broad understanding, which is still maybe a paroksha jnana. We are hearing that from somebody, but we keep internalizing that repeatedly. We keep looking for that tattva in everything that we do. That is the dharana, constantly. And how to do that is what we now are being told in the Dhyana Yoga, right? After in the first 10 slokas of the Dhyana Yoga, the sixth chapter, he explains again. He reminds us that anashritaha karma palam karyam karma karotyaha. You can't stay without action. You nanirad virna chakriyaha. Okay, sannyasa is basically the state of being non-dependent on the karma phala, but keep on doing the karma. There is no way you can give up the karma. Na nirajnihi, na cha akriyaha. There is no sannyasa is not. So whoever is a yogi, it himself is a sannyasi, the way he was explaining. And very clearly Krishna again underlines, he is not referring to sannyasa ashrama. This is sannyasa, the behavior, samyak nyasta, give up, renounce the fruits of the action. He again explains all of that for the first 10 sloka. From the 11th sloka onward is where the true nature of the dhyana, how to do the dhyana, right? Now, this is where I think we spend some time. I don't know if things came out very clearly the last week when we spoke about this, but we need to understand, right? The core reason for all this confusion, okay, in the samsara. One thing we need to understand is that there are three gunas. There is Rajoguna, Sattva Guna, Tamo Guna. Rajoguna is the core essence of this society, right? The samsara started with Rajoguna. Okay, the third chapter he says, Rajoguna samudbhavaha kama krodha. Kama krodha is the essence of it. When you look at all the animal planets, we have that kama krodha. There is a lot of desire, there is a lot of anger. That's the abhinivesha. That is the core nature of the animal planet, right? We move up and up and up. Okay. Now, in the ascent to going up and up and up, natural way that we acquire is tamas. We tend to shun the perceptors, the perceptions, and then kind of stay aloof to all of that. That's the natural way we want to be. Like people want to drink and forget the agony of the day. People want to binge watch some mindless TV programs and then forget things in the day. People want to listen to some loud music and shut their perceptions for the rest of the world. People want to do a lot. So natural way that we are attracted to is the tamoguna, right? Rehabilitation. Okay, the concept of rehabilitation is where basically we shut everything away from the active world, right? But that may not really help us. Ostriching our way out may not really help us. Sattva guna has to creep in, right? We have to really get aware of that prakasha needs to be there. The enlightenment should happen. The prakasha should happen. So sattva guna. So we know for the fact that in this jagat, there is rajoguna, which is the natural guna of the creation. There is tamoguna, which is also good, no doubt, but it is good for a rehabilitation kind of a purpose, not on a day-to-day basis. Like, alcohol may be good as a medicinal use. Like, some of these drugs can be used. It can be used like for example in Ayurveda, they use this dopamine as a anesthesia kind of a thing, Ayurvedic anesthesia, painkillers. They're not good on a day-to-day usage. They are good in an extreme case of rehabilitation kind of a. So Tamoguna is good from a rehabilitation perspective, but we can't ostrich ourselves on a daily basis. On a regular basis, we have to deliberate towards the awareness to keep ourselves calm from that Rajoguna thing. And that is where we are drawn into another concept called the Pancha Manovritti. The manovritti or the chitta vritti is fivefold. There is a shipta vritti, there is a moodha vritti. Shipta is the scattered. That's the typical rajogunatmaka vritti. Is the scattered way. Life is all scattered. And again, it can easily be linked to the gunas also, right? So rajogunatmaka vritta is the shipta vritta. Then tamogunatmaka vritta is the moodhatva. There's a lot of moodha, ignorance. Okay, we get into. Then there is vikshipta, visheshatah chiptah or viruddhata chiptah, like in the vikshipta, where we deliberate with the sattva kind of a thought process to move away from that. And then there is a ekagra. Ekagra is that where the typical example that we are quoted whenever we are explaining the manovritti is the stilling of the water, how the ripples, when you throw stone into a water body, the ripples come. And then slowly after some time, the ripples keep on decreasing in their intensity, and then they kind of, suddenly appear to be disappearing completely. That's the ekagrata, where we still the turbulences of the water body inside us in the shipta state, like, continued state of vikshipta will, continued state of deliberation in the sattva marga will lead us to the path of, ekagrata. Now, ekagrata, again, terminology, some people call it ekagrata sthiti, some people call it savikalpa samadhi sthiti. There are different, asamprajnata, sorry, sasamprajnata, samadhi sthiti. There are different ways in which the same thing is called, but it's the ekagrata, where the water is trying to be stilled. And then it goes beyond, right? Asamprajnata, without even the material plane, beyond the grasp of the material plane, we have another thing called a niruddha. Okay. Now, these are the five states in which the manovritti can play upon. And we also spoke about the Sapta Chakra or the Ashta Chakra. Like, when we spoke about Navadvare Pure Dehi, Naiva Kurvana Karayan in the fifth Adhyaya, one of the things that we saw is that, in one of Upanishads it's also mentioned, Ashtadvara, Navadvara, Ashta Chakra, Dehanam Pura Ayodhya, this body that we have inherited or being gifted is basically consisting of Navadvara and Ashtakra. And if we understand the Ashtakra concept also, there is a Mooladhara Chakra. I mean, primarily we look at seven chakras in the front and one at the back. The Bindu Chakra comes at the back. That is where the Shikha is. I mean, where some of us who leave the Shikha, there is a chakra called the Bindu Chakra. But the seven main chakras that run along the spinal cord or little above is that Mooladhara Chakra. Mooladhara is the bottom most that comes at the middle part of the body. Now, this is very important, right? Below the hip is the animal kingdom for us. And above the hip is where the human life really, really starts materializing and starts developing, right? So above the hip, the hip line where the spinal cord ends, right? That's the bottom of the tail. And when we understand the Kundalini concept, there is a Mooladhara. Mooladhara, the 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 main characteristic of it is that it's a Rajoguna. Okay, because there is a lot of scatteredness, and Mooladhara, the Adipati is also Ganapati, right? Ganapati, very beautifully when we look at it, essentially Ganapati is depiction of half man, half animal, right? And that is the point at which the ascension will happen. Aru Ruksho Muner Yogam. When you really want to go up the path of the yoga, the first thing that you need to do is move away from the animal instincts and then move up the path of the human yoga. And that is great because see another way of looking at those seven chakras is that there are 14 lokas, right? The Bhuhu, Bhuvaha, Suvaha, Mahaha, Janaha, Tapaha, Satyam. The seven lokas, Satya lokas. Bhu loka to the Satya loka. There are seven. Those seven could be counted to be the seven chakra. They are all the upper portion. The seven below, Atala, Vitala, Sutala, Taratala, Mahatala, Rasatala, Patala, it goes right. The seven lokas are the animal kingdom. When we say, like in North India, even today we have this concept, right? When we say, Rasatal mein, you will get relegated to Rasatala. Rasatana is the penultimate sthala, Adama sthana, before the Patala, absolute abysmal state can occur. The Rasatana is the penultimate one, right? So when we look at those 14 lokas, the 14 lokas are inside our body. The 7 chakras below the hip are the animal loka. The 7 chakras above the hip are the human loka. Human loka is the path for ascension, Aru Ruksho Munir Yogam. So when we look at the concept of the 7 chakra, we have the Mooladhara, where the Adipati is Ganesha, and that is where and Ganesha is also the path of Avakasha, right? He is the Adipati for Akasha, and Akasha is the one that gave us the opportunity for life. When Big Bang happened, the Omkara came out, when first Shabda Tanmatra came out, it came out through Akasha. Akasha was the first Bhuta among the Panchamahabhuta that came out, primarily to spread out the Shabda Tanmatras, right? So that is where the opportunity starts, like Akasha Tattva starts from that Mooladhara, right? So the Ganapati is Adipati. Then we move into it's also called the coccygeal layer, chakra, right? And then we move into the carnal chakra, the Swadhisthana chakra, right? Just above. Mooladhara is at the bottom. When we do if you look at some of if you attend inner engineering course from Sadhguru, I think he stresses a lot on pressing the point of the Mooladhara chakra through our heels when we sit for the Padmasana to do pranayama and things like that. So Sadhguru stresses a lot on pressing the chakra constantly, right? So there is a chakra concept where it starts from the Mooladhara, that's the bottom most, moves up the cycle into the Swadhisthana, that is where the carnal, a lot of these lust, greed, all of these things come there. Still little bit of Abhinivesha, okay, still little bit of animal kingdom, but Swadhisthana, carnal layer. Overcome that, we get into the Manipura. Manipura, the Adipati there is Surya. Surya, or we sometimes say Rama, because the Bija mantra there is Ram, 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 right? So, Rama. Now that is where we get into the actual, Yatindriya, we become actual self-control in that Manipura. But when you look at the Manipura chakra, there is one leaf in the center and 10 leaves surrounding that. If you look at the symbology, the Mooladhara has 4 leaves around them. The Manipura has 1 in the center and there are 10 surrounding it. Right? Sorry. So that chakra, see, in a way, you can look at it as Ram, Ram, Ram is the Bija mantra. So Rama is definitely a very Adipati, along with Surya. The Adipati is also Rama, because Ram, Ram, Ram is the Bija mantra. So when we say Sri Rama, Rama, Rame, 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 Norame, there are some 5-6 times in that one mantra we utter the Bija mantra for the Manipura chakra. And whenever we utter them, whether consciously, subconsciously, we are feeding the chakra. Invariably, we feed those chakra. Like if you see hum, 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 you are feeding the chakra, Vishuddhi chakra, right? If you know ram, 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 you are feeding that Manipura chakra. Okay, yam, 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 you are feeding the Anahata chakra. So, ram, lam, 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 you are feeding the Mooladhara chakra. If you say bum, 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 you are feeding the Swadhisthana chakra. So you are, when you recite some of these Bija mantras, Bija aksharas, you are invariably feeding those chakras and they get activated. And what does it get activated? Mooladhara is where there is a little bit of Abhinivesha. You have to suppress that. And that is the activity that happens when you keep on saying lam, 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 lam. Okay, or very nicely, right? There are various techniques of doing it. We can't just randomly do it. Okay, but just from an academic perspective, when you want to understand, Mooladhara is where the animal kingdom ends and the human life begins. Swadhisthana is where the carnal chakra, the lust and things like that will happen. And then Ram is where the Manipura is where the self-control will happen. But the key thing to be caveat, to be borne in mind, the thing to be mindful of, you need to be mindful of is that, one leaf is Rama, the 10 leaves of Ramana. Okay, Rama and Ravana both are possible in that Manipura chakra. We can, if you just stop at that Manipura chakra, becoming completely Indriya Nigraha, we can become both. We can become either of the two, Rama or Ravana. To make it much more clearer that we ascend to the path of Rama and not Ravana, we have perhaps understand the difference between the two. That is where we have to look at Anahata. Anahata is where the Hriddesha, the Hridaya, right? That's the 4th chakra from the bottom or from the top. When you look at from the top also, that's the 4th, that's the middle point. After that comes our Vishuddhi. We have the Ajna chakra, And then we have the Sahasrara. Sahasrara is the top. Okay, let's not talk about Sahasrara, Ajna, so far. I think Ajna we briefly spoke about that. We have the Vishuddhi Chakra, which is at the Kantha. Right? Vishuddhi Chakra is at the Kantha. Right? When you look at Anahata, Anahata is the middle. Right? Now, when we talk about the 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 Gita Charya's message, I think he is addressing the guna ways of segregation, the Sattva, Raja, Tama. He's talking about the Manovritti kind of segregation, like where there is Shipta, Mudha, Vikshipta, Ekagrata, Niruddha, and we will see how. He's also talking about the Chakra concept, and we will see how. First thing for the Dhyana, when he starts from the 11th sloka, he states very clearly, Shucho Deshe Pratisthapya. We have to get to a clean place. Sthiramasana Matmanaha. Get to a seat which is sthira, which is still. Okay. And for Atmanaha, for yourself. And शुचो देशे प्रतिष्ठाप्य स्थिरमासनमात्मनः ना अति उच्चितं ना अति नीचम, not too high, not too low. Now when you say not too high, not too low, when you look at the seven chakra concept, it is the anahata, which is basically focused on the hridaya. Hridaya is basically paramatma. Nati chitam nati nicham, shaila ajina kusha uttaram. Shaila ajina kusha, I think we spoke about this. Shaila is the cloth. Cloth is typically the silk cloth. Silk cloth comes from the Agni Tattva, comes from the spitting of that liquid that is basically coming from the Agni Tattva. Ajina is basically the skin. Skin is basically solidified blood, which is the Apo Tattva, the liquid Tattva, which is basically the liquid day is both the Tamoguna, okay, as well as the Mudha Tattva. Like Ajina, the skin is basically the covering one. It covers it. And then Kusha. Kusha is basically the Darba grass, right? Darba grass comes from the earth. It defines the Rajoguna. It also defines the Vikshipta. So Vikshipta, it's spring up, scatters. That's how the Kusha grass also grows, right? It just scatters itself, from the thing. It just scatters, right? So the Chaila, Ajina, Kusha, Uttaram. Uttaram is on top of that. If you look at it from the Gunatmaka concept, it is above suppressing the Rajo, Tamo, and the Sattva Guna. Above that comes the Anahata Chakra. You focus on that. Above that comes the Ekagra Sthiti. You focus on that. When you look at it from Manovritti state also, you overcome the Shipta state, the Mudha state, the Vikshipta state. Now come to the Ekagrata, and that's what he says. The very next sloka he says, Tatra Ekagram Manaha Kritva. Manaha is Hridaya. Ekagra is the manovritti, right? And that is the anahata chakra. So both, when you look at it, either from the gunatmaka sense or the manovritti sense or the chakra sense, he is talking the same thing. He is correlating them in a very, very layman's perspective. Tatra ekagram manasatva yata chitta indriya kriya, completely controlled. Upavishya asane yunjya yogam atma vishuddhaye. Okay, continue to stay engaged in the state of yoga for the sake of self purification. And very importantly, samam kaya shiro grivam, very still kaya shira griva. Body is the upper body. Upper body is where the yogasana starts, right? We all sit in padmasana, where at that state the body is only the upper body. We are not bothered about the lower body because that is the animal kingdom. In the padmasana, when we sit, we are not bothered about the lower part. Right? It's only the upper body. So kaya is the upper body, the back onward, right? Spinal, straight spine. On top of that, straight shira, and in between that, straight griva. Basically, getting to a straight posture. Okay, dharayan achalam tiraha. Okay, we keep on internalizing the same concept in a very, very unmoving way, very still way, right? Some preksha nasikagram, from all the attention brought to the nasikagra. Okay, the front of nasikagra, we spoke about that. It can be the tip of the nose, it could be the starting of the nose. Tip of the nose, we know where it is. If we focus on that, our eyes become squint. Uh, Starting of the nose is, it is the in between the eyebrows. And when we focus on that, our eyes become dope eyes. And I think that is more appropriate, right? Because that is where the Ajna Chakra comes. Ajna Chakra is the Guru Chakra. And Ajna is the natural progression. Once you move up Muladhara, Swadhisthana, Anahata, Shuddhi, you automatically come to the Ajna state, right? You focus on that, and that's the Guru Chakra. That is where the complete controlling happens. In the scientific sense today, they call it as the pineal gland. That is where the complete enzymes and things like that, start getting controlled, in our body, right? So a focus on the Ajna Chakra, though in the literal translation it can mean both tip of the nose as well as the middle of the eyebrows, Nasikagram. Okay, but we have seen quite a few instances where Krishna keeps talking about Bhruvor Madhye. In the previous chapter, towards the end, Sparsham Krispa Bahibhahyan Chakshushchaivantare Dhruvo. Like, he speaks about that very briefly. He just drops that small hint that what is going to come in the next chapter. Okay, towards the end of the fifth chapter, he drops it. So I think Bhruvor Madhye is a much better way of understanding this Nasikagram rather than the tip of the nose. I think some translations and many people also try to focus on the tip of the nose. I think that may not be as effective. And then see, when we keep the Kaya, Shira, Griva firm, and when we focus on the Bhruvar Madhye, you just observe with a half eyes open, half eyes closed kind of that doe eyes kind of a state, because we are focusing on the center of the forehead, right? Typical, exactly in between the eyebrows, where we normally keep the kumkum and things like that, you will invariably see the tip of the nose. But if you focus on the tip of the nose, we are going away, right? So practice that. I mean, all these things, more than the academic exercises, I think we should also practice them a few times. Sampreshanasikagrantam, Vishashchan Avalokayan, Anavalokayan. They don't get your thoughts go here and there. Just focus on that one point alone. Now, next shloka, that is where we now come to shloka number 14. Right? We quickly see what this shloka is, and then maybe we can do some chintana, next couple of shlokas, right? We move on to that. So this is a little longer recap. I thought this section of the Bhagavad Gita is one of the best sections for us to get into practical, practice of yogasana. There is a lot of good message coming. I thought, it is worth it to kind of spend that extra time, right? So let's look into a couple of more slokas. I think the techniques of Gita, the techniques of yoga is a little more fine-tuned, right? And this is as good as it gets. Whether we look at, Yoga Vashishta, whether we look at Hatha Yoga is very direct, right? It's prescriptive, do this asanas and things like that. But whether we look at, Patanjali Yoga Sutra or whatever, any other scripture, what Gita Charya has given us in these few shlokas, hardly about 10 shlokas, and look at it from a contextual point of view. So we will touch upon that a little while later. Okay, this is as good as it gets from a layman's perspective. So we will see what the 14th shloka says. Click on the link that Shraddhaji has pinned to the room. We directly come to this shloka number 14 of the 6th Adhyaya. Quite a decent website put together by the Aurobindo Ashram, by Dr. Sampadananda. But we will not take it everything on the face value. Wherever we think that the literal translation could be a little, or there is a little bit of opinionation coming in from the translator, we will put a cautionary word there, not from rejecting anything, but primarily from reassuring ourselves that that is not the literal translation. Opinions are good. Everyone's opinion is good because they all have studied, they all have done their sadhana. We will take that opinion, but that opinion, the problem with opinion is it shouldn't be the final message of the Gita Charya's message, right? It's just one of the interpretations. So to that extent, we will caution ourselves. So we look into this. But nonetheless, a very beautiful website which will serve a lot for what we try to do here. Right? Look at this. The shloka reads like this. Prashantatma vigatadhir brahmachari vrate sthitah manah sanyamya machittu yukta asita matparaha. Prashantatma vigatadhir brahmachari vrate sthitah manah sanyamya machittah yukta asita matparaha. On the same web page, we scroll down a little bit, we see a section called Padacheda. What it does is it breaks down the words of a shloka into individual words. Prashanta Atma, Vigata Bhihi, Brahmachari Brate Sthitaha, Manaha Sanyamya, Mat Chittaha, Yuktaha Asita, Mat Paraha. Right? What does that give in terms of when we unjumble these broken down words into proper prose format? We get to hear that in the Anvaya section. Just above Padacheda, we see Anvaya. Hey Arjuna, he's telling this all to Arjuna, right? Bhagavan is telling this to Arjuna. Hey Arjuna, Prashanta Atma, Vigata Bhihi, Brahmachari Vrate Sitaha, Manaha Sanyamya, Mat Chittaha, Mat Paraha Yuktaha Asit. Almost the Anvaya is almost the same order as the Shloka, not much different. What does this all mean? We click on the top, we have a link called dictionary. When we click on that, we get the word by word meaning. Hey Arjuna, that Prashanta Atma, that calm person, the calm within kind of a person, who is Vigatabhihi, who is free from fear, and who is Brahmachari Pratesita, who is seated in the firm vow of Brahmacharya, continence, that's what the opinion says. Manaha Sanyamya, having controlled his mind. Mat Chitta, completely directing, controlling his mentality, Chitta, towards me, Matpara. No, Matpara, and completely leaning towards me. And him, he is now explained. He is the Bhagavan. In the fourth chapter itself, that little bit of the Bhagavad Tattva is being revealed. Like, he comes Yada Yada Hi Dharmasya Glanir Bhavati Bharata. Now, the Paramatma Tattva has been revealed a little bit. Right? Now we can't say who is he. Like, while Krishna, throughout Bhagavad-Gita, quite often interchangeably refers to himself both in the first person as well as the third person. But when he says Mat Paraha, it's definitely the Paramatma. The Anahata Chakra that is where the Hriddesha, and that's what he mentions in the end of the fifth adhyaya. So, I am that Suhrita, I am that Sarvaloka Maheshwara, I am that Parabrahma. I think that part is already being revealed. From the fourth adhyaya to the fifth adhyaya, we have seen that. So Mat Paraha, Bhagavat Paraha. Okay, in the fourth adhyaya also, for Aparoksha Jnana, for making that knowledge non-direct, we have to be Shraddhavan Labhate Jnanam Tat Paraha. Some books say Tat Paraha, some books say Mat Paraha. They both say. So he's repeating the same thing. Who is constantly leaning towards me? Who has got his complete consciousness fixed on me? Yuktaha, completely engaged. Right? Yuktaha, yukti is completely engaged. Okay, or firm in yoga. Asita stays there. Now, when we look at this, right, again, Prashantatma, Prashanta Prakarshanena, Shanta, not just Shanta. Right? Shanta is very useful word, right? Whenever we see Shanta, that is the path towards Sukha. We keep hearing that repeatedly. Ashantasya kuta Sukham, from the second chapter says, onward, wherever he uses the word Shanta, it is a stepping stone towards Parama Sukha. That is something that we need to know. In this chapter also, we will see Sukha being spoken about very soon. He will also speak about Sukha because Shanti is what will lead into Sukha. Right? And this is not the Shanta. Prakarshana Shanta. Prakarshana is Prakatita. Prakarshana is Prakashita. No, enlightening way, completely Shanta Atma. Like, where Prakasha is that, Deepam Jyoti Parabrahma, right? That one who has unlocked that light from within. That is all about Dhyan. This entire chapter, when we want to reference it back to the sixth shloka, every chapter of Bhagavad Gita is kind of revealed through the respective shloka of the Purushottama Yoga, right? The 15th chapter, that is where it is very, very special. The 15th chapter, 6th shloka says very clearly, Natadbhasayate Surya, that place is not lit by sun, na shashankaha, na pavakaha, not by the moon nor by the fire. And once you reach there, there is no returning back to samsara. Yadjatvan anivartante. Tadbhava paramamam. That is my supreme abode. That is the Bhagavad Para. That is the Bhagavad Chitta. That is Bhagavad Bhava. That is Brahmi Sthiti. That is Brahma Yoga. I mean, we see that, right? In the sixth shloka of the Purushottama Yoga. So now he says that Prakarshanena Atma. Completely enlightened Atma. Okay. And completely Shanta. Completely tranquil. Completely unmoved Atma. Vigata Bhihi. Overcoming fear. Where does the fear happen predominantly? That Abhinivesha is in the animal world. So you overcome that. Mooladhara is primarily for that. So activation of Mooladhara Chakra is primarily to overcome that Abhinivesha, right? Vigata Bhihi. Brahmachari Pratesita. No, Brahmachari is a beautiful word. Brahmachari can broadly, basically, very, very basic sense can mean three. Brahmani Charati Brahmachari, like in the second chapter, Yavan Artha Udapane Sarvata Samplutodaki, Tavan Sarveshu Vedeshu, Brahmanasya Vijanatam. Brahmani is basically Brahma Anati iti Brahmana, and the one who follows the path of Brahma, right? That is Brahma. Like, Tasma Sarvagatam Brahma Nityam Yajne Pratishtitam. This entire yajna is basically Brahma yajna. Right? That is and one who constantly does this Vihita karma, without bothering about anything. That is the Brahma Pata. Brahmani charati, who keeps walking towards Brahma, that is brahmachari. Second is Brahmamacharati, it is brahmachari. One, he, everything that he celebrates, everything that he conducts is Brahma. The karma is Brahma. Like for example, in the fourth Adhyaya, there is a beautiful sloka that comes right before explaining that yajna. Krishna, different types of yajna. Krishna clearly defines at the end of the day, Brahma Arpanam. Okay, whatever is offered into this yajna is Brahma. Brahma Havihi, the Havis is also Brahma. Brahma Agno, the fire in which it is burnt, it is all getting consumed, it's also Brahma. Brahmana Hutam, the Huta is also for Brahma. Okay, the one who is offering through the channel through which it is being offered. I might be the Yajna Yajamana, the very word Yajamana, right? I might be the Yajna Yajamana, but it is Brahma. I'm just doing an agency role. Through me, it is being offered, but it is actually getting through Brahma. Brahmaiva Tena Gantavim, it is all going, where is the eventual destination of all of this? It's Brahma. Brahma Karma Samadhina. Like, that's a Brahma Acharana. All this karma is very, very exciting for us, but it is absolute state of samadhi for Brahma. I mean, there is so much of noise inside all of us, inside all our lives. But when we extend this entire view up and up and up and up and go all the way to the Brahma, for him it is absolute samadhi. Okay, he is unmoved. Whether we do right things, wrong things, disastrous things, okay, that apuryamana machala pratishtam, like, he is like that. Whether the rivers are gushing into the ocean, they are dried up, or they are going through the normal course, that ocean is absolutely unmoved. That is Brahma. That is the Samadhi sthiti. Brahma acharati. That is Brahmachari. The third way of that we understand the word Brahmachari is a Naistika Brahmacharya, right? So where we give up all the sense control, basically, shunning our, Shrotradi, Indriya, Sanyama, control, basically control. And Shabdadi Vishaya Indriya Vishayupati. That comes a little later. We'll see that later. Shabdadi Vijayji, wherever there is a slight break in the voice, please do alert me. I may want to repeat some of those lines again. Yeah. Brahmachari can be three. The third is the Naistika Brahmachari, right? Which is basically celibacy, continence. That's what this website says, continence. That's just one of the meanings, not necessarily the only meaning. But I think it makes a lot of sense when Dr. Sampadananda says Brahmacharya has to be continence. It's basically that celibacy that a typical Brahmacharya takes the lead. And that is important because that is the Swadhisthana Chakra, overcoming the greed, the lust, and all of that, right? Overcome Vigata Bhihi is having controlled the Mooladhara Chakra, having got, not control, having got Mooladhara Chakra under regulation, right? Brahmachari Vrate is basically, in Vrata is where we get the Swadhisthana Chakra, carnal, it's a carnal Chakra, get that. Manaha Sanyamya, that's the Manipura Chakra, controlling the self, controlling the, Shabdadi, Vishayananya, Indriya, Nishijupati, control them. When we experience things, you experience for the sake of jnana, not for indulgence. That's the Manasanyamya. So you don't, Manasanyamya basically means you don't get indulgent. That's the essential thing, right? You are in the middle of the samsara. You're not disconnected from activities. But Manasanyamya, absolutely self-control, which is staying away from even the minutest of the indulgences. And I think we will speak more about this as we come. So, Mooladhara, which is Vigata Bhihi, Swadhisthana, which is our Brahmachari Vrata, and Manaha Sanyama, which is our Manipura Chakra. Mat Chittaha, Mat Paraha, then comes the Anahataha. That is where you unlock the Prashanta Manasa, Prashantatma. Okay, Yukta Asita. Okay, he must sit. And how? So, again, see, right? The words could mean very, very ordinary, but when you look at it from the chakra perspective, it is all falling in place. When you look at it from the manovritti perspective, it will all fall in place. I mean, do little bit of study on the seven chakras. Very beautiful concept. There is a lot of fear mongering around the Kundalini. Don't bother. Whether we achieve that siddhi through bhakti marga, jnana marga, aushadha marga. There are different ways of unlocking Kundalini. Whether we want to, activate the Kundalini chakras or not, Kundalini chakras do get activated. Right? There could be indirect means of doing them. There could be direct means of doing them. Only those people who practice Kundalini, so-called, the quote-unquote, Kundalini practices are not the ones who have Vida, Pingala, Sushumna inside them. The nadis are there for everyone. The chakras are there in everyone. And naturally, when we ascend the path of yoga, those chakras will get activated. Right? It's good to know what's happening. Just do a little bit of self-study. I think that's a very interesting subject as well. So all of these things, they fall very, very nicely. Now, why am I telling all of this? I know, is Krishna ever mentioned about any of the chakras? He didn't mention about the chakras, but they make sense when we understand the chakra concept. And it is important because, see, we are in the Yuddha Bhumi of the Kurukshetra, we are in the Yuddha Bhumi. Krishna cannot just expect Arjuna in the middle of the war to find the Kushagra, find the either the Vyagrajina or the Krishnajina. He can't find the Ajina. He can't find the Chaila. He can't find the silk cloth, and then find the Shucho Desha, a clean split, because that is Yuddha. The bugles are already blown. The trumpets are already blown. Like the Tuvula, the cacophony is already started. Okay, the first adhyaya, we see that, yadi mama pratikara vashastram shastrapanaya, in the state of my weapons being, receded from my hand, Bhartarashtra, if one of those Dhritarashtra's son kill me, okay, tanme kshematranam bhavet, that becomes kshematana for me, that is better for me. So basically, Yuddha has started. Okay, now you can't find the Shucho Desha at that time. So Krishna is definitely explaining to Arjuna the concept of dhyana, which is more esoteric in nature, which is more mental in nature. Right? He has to overcome the Bhiti. And Bhita is something that he will overcome a lot of times. In the last couple of chapters, one of the more often used Sambodhana for Arjuna is Parantapa. You can't become a Parantapa with Bhiti inside all of it. Right? He has to overcome that. So he has overcome that. He is a brahmachari. That's where in the second chapter he's like Brahmanasya Vijnanataha. The Brahmana word is repeatedly used for Arjuna because he is that. Now in this section for the dhyana, he's just reminding him, boss, you are already there. Like, just activate yourself a little up. All you need to do is just focus on that Matparaha, like, Kriddesha, where the Bhagavan resides. You are moving away from that. That is where Arjuna is Aparuksha Jnani, right? He's already a half path into it, right? So let's see what quickly the Aurobindo interpretation says for this shloka. It says, the mind kept calm, free from fear. The vow of Brahmacharya observed, and whole controlled mentality turned into me, towards me. He must sit firm in yoga, wholly given up to me, so that the lower action of the consciousness shall be merged in the higher peace. Now, other than the Prashanta Atma, which is the mind kept calm aspect, everything else is already there in Arjuna. When we look at the Sambodhanas being used by Krishna, Dhananjaya, Parantapa, all of these things, Pandava, all of these things are already there. Right? All he has to find is he has to focus on that Hriddesha, the Anahata Chakra, and continue to stay put in this Dharma Yuddha. That is where the Bhagavad feeling will come. Brahmanyadhaya sarva karmani sangam tyaktva karoti lipyatena sapapena padma patrama. The concept that he started establishing in the fifth chapter, that comes. So, and also, right, not only Krishna who is reminding him the mental yoga, mental jnana yoga, it's also, Bhagavan Vedavyasa. There are two Krishnas, right, that we are dealing with right now. One is Vasudeva Krishna, who is the communicator, he is the Gita Charya. But we also have the Vashishta Krishna, which is Krishna Dvaipayana, right? He is the one who's done the Sangraha. So, as an opportunity for the welfare of the mankind, obviously, history was written. The history book, the Mahabharata, Jaya, the big corpus book, was written not for the Yuddha, not for the sake of Arjuna. That is written for us, all the progeny who followed in this Bharatavarsha, right? All of us, all of us Bharatiyas, for our sake is what Vedavyasa Maharshi, Vedavyasa Bhagavan has given this, right? So we can look at it from both perspectives. From Arjuna's perspective, it's a mental jnana. Most of it is already part of him. And of course, for all of us, when we want to be kartavya sadhakas, nirantara kartavya sadhakas, this jnana is essential for us to overcome the fear. Many a times we give up the path of yoga is because of a certain fear. When we look at this section, right, we will see more and more fear also coming from Arjuna a little later. Throughout the while, Arjuna's fear is he will lose his near and dear. Okay, throughout the while, his fear is what is Shreyasara for me. His fear is that the adharma will become strong, and the kula will go for a toss. A lot of this fear factor, right? Forget all of that, you do for the sake of Bhagavad Gita. missing in Arjuna is that Prashantatma, that focus, unwavering focus, right? If there are any questions, if there are any thoughts, I know some gentlemen out here, very good learned people. Please to come up on stage. We can have some discussion. But nonetheless, till 9:30, we will keep looking at more and more sloka. We now move on to the next sloka. We click on the top of the page. We have this hyperlink called next, right? We move on to sloka number 15, right? So look at this, right? Both from a literal sense, minimum there are three levels of meaning for every sloka. The literal meaning, then there is a adi daivaka meaning, then there is a adhyatmika meaning, right? Spiritual. I think spiritually adi daivaka, you can see the rajoguna, the different ways in which some of these adipatis, the Rama, the Ganesha, the Devi, and all can come to play. And then we have the adhyatmika, all of that manovrittis and things like that we can control them, right? So we can look at it in different ways. We move on to the 15th sloka, very interesting. Yunjannevam sadatmanam yogi niyatamanasaha shantim nirvana paramam matsanstha adhigacchati. Yunjannevam sadatmanam yogi niyatamanasah shantim nirvana paramam matsanstha adhigacchati. Again, more. What is the benefit of this? Right? So, now, the brief techniques are already given, right? Shucho Deshe Pratishthapya, get a clean, that's very, very important. Right? Shucho Deshe, those techniques are already given. Chailajana Pishottaram, Ekagram Manahakritva, all of that is very clearly given. Nasikagram, like, Sampresha Nasikagram. Activation of the key points, the firmness of the sitting posture. Again, Na ati uchitam, na ati nicham can also mean that whenever we sit on Padmasana, don't lean too much forward, don't lean too much backward. You have to be straight, the body. So that contemplate more and more and more, and do some of the daily practices also, and constantly think about these shlokas. I mean, by heart these 10 odd shlokas, right? And constantly think about them when we do dhyana, the dhyana posture and things like that. And they make absolute sense, and more we do with the chintana, I think there are deeper meanings that will start unraveling. Right? So this shloka, let's see what the Padacheda says. Right? Yunjannevam sadatmanam yogi niyatamanasah shantim nirvana paramamat samstha varigacchati. The Padacheda says, Yunjan evam sada atmanam yogi niyatamanasah shantim nirvana paramam mat samstham adhigacchati. When we unjumble them, we get this Anvaya, right? Hey Arjuna, evam niyatamanasah yogi sada atmanam yunjan mat samstham nirvana paramam shantim adhigacchati. Now, constantly think about him. Matchittaha matparaha is what he said, right, in the previous sloka. What is the benefit of that? Let's click on dictionary. Hey Arjuna, right? Evam niyatamanasah. Thus, one who is completely self-controlled, mind-controlled. Evam niyatamanasah yogi. That yogi who is completely self-controlled. Sada atmanam yunjan. Always engaged in discovering himself, or always engaged in himself, always putting the yoga towards himself. When we look at the same thing, we look at it in different ways, all converging to the same meaning. Mat samstham, okay, my he will adhigachati, like in my foundation, mat samstham, nirvana paramam shanti. Nirvana is the bodilessness. Vana is kosha. Kosha is body, sharira. Nirvana is the state of bodiless, okay, beyond the body. Paramam shanti, the supreme peace of bodilessness, which is absolute convergence with the supreme Brahma, right? That's the Brahma Nirvana. Nirvana Paramam Shanti, okay, the supreme peaceful state of bodilessness, right? Literally, we have to see. Adhigachati, Gachati goes, Adhigachati attains, right? So the one who constantly, which is basically overcoming the Muladhara, policies, overcoming the Swadhisthana policies, overcoming the Manipura policies, focus constantly on the Anahata, which is where the Paramatma resides. Suddesha is where the Paramatma, Sarvasya Chaham, Vidisannivishtaha. We started this entire journey with the 15th chapter, right? He is the one who is in the heart of everyone. That is where Anahata Chakra is. That is where we focus on Paramatma, right? Yunjan Evam, Sadatmanam, and through that, it's what we need to look for our own true self. Because we are all at the end of the day his own Amsha. The seventh shloka of the 15th chapter, again, we studied 15th chapter for this reason. There's a lot of references back and forth we can do beautifully, right? We are all his own tiny Amsha, right? He will explain that in the next chapter. We will get to see that in a little more nicer way. But since we have seen the 15th chapter, we can refer to that. So, like this, somebody who constantly stays his para, his chitta, stays in his chitta, stays in his para. Okay. Paramam nirvana shanti, nirvana paramam shanti adhigachati. Mat samsthan nirvana paramam shanti adhigachati. In his, founded in him, the supreme bodilessness state of shanti one will attain, which is basically absolute tranquility. But again, the condition is that, sada, always, niyata, there is no break to it. And niyatamanataha, completely controlled. Because the disturbances, the distractions are plenty. When we practice just mere 108 times chanting of any shloka, we can't sit through. Right? We get 10 different ideas. Couple of thoughts from the TV program, couple of thoughts from yesterday's match that RCB lost. We get some crazy thoughts. We can't chant 108 times of a favorite shloka without distraction. Right? Niyata manasaha, completely mind control, which is staying away from distractions, staying away from indulgences. Right? Sometimes it's difficult even to focus when there is cold, wind, rain, sweat. If you sit in a place where there is absolute, heat and we are all sweating, focus is not easy. The way to focus is overcoming all of that, right? Very, very difficult. So some of these, right, they look like as very casual passing comments. When we think about them, they are all very, very, strong and very, very profound. Right? So let's see what Aurobindo has to say for this shloka. Right? Aurobindo translation or interpretation, it says, thus always putting himself in yoga by control of his mind, the yogi attains to the supreme peace of nirvana, which has its foundation in me. Right? Which is again basically Brahmicity, Brahma Nirvana Sthiti. Right? Now we will move on to the next shloka. Again, it reads like this, shloka number 16. नात्यश्नतस्तु योगोऽस्ति न चैकान्तमनश्नतः न चाति स्वप्नशीलस्य जाग्रतो नैव चार्जुन नात्यश्नतस्तु योगोऽस्ति न चैकान्तमनश्नतः न चैकान्तमनश्नतः न चान्त्यन्तमनश्नतः. There are two. न च अन्त्यतमनश्नतः. There are two patabheda, but that's okay. Nachaikantamanashnata is also fine. Nachaikantamanashnata nachati swapnashilasya jagrato naiva charjanam. Right? Padacheda, it reads like this. Na ati ashnataha tu yogaha asti. Nacha ekantam anashnataha. Nacha ati swapnashilasya jagrataha nacha eva cha arjuna. What does that appear when we put them into the prose order? The Anvaya. Hey Arjuna. Now Arjuna is a very nice Sambodhana. You'll see why. Right? Hey Arjuna. Ati ashtataha cha ati swapnashilasya cha na yogaha na asti. Ekantam anashtataha tu na jagrataha cha na eva. I think it can be a little more simplified. Ati ashtataha yogaha na asti. Ati swapnashilasya yogaha na asti. Anashnataha ekantam na asti. Jagrataha cha ati cha eva ekantam yogaha na asti. We can do it that way. Basically, there is no ekanta, there is no yoga for somebody who is anashnataha. Let's see the dictionary, right? The prose order can be a little bit. Hey Arjuna. See, this is where Arjuna is very nice. Arjayati Arjuna. Jnana Arjuna. You see that, right? Jnana Arjuna is basically somebody who loves very nicely. These are all complicated messages given. One, hey Arjuna, and Arjuna is very nice. That's a name. See, he is the ultimate epitome. When we look at the characters of Mahabharata, Arjuna very nicely signifies Shravana, Manana, Vididhyasana. So, what is Shravana, Manana, Vididhyasana? That is the core strength of a student. A student is great. A great student always should possess these three qualities. Basically, very great jnana, very great at picking up knowledge. Arjuna, he was dear to Dronacharya, he was dear to Parashurama, he was dear to Indra, he was dear to Shiva, he was dear to anyone. You take anyone, he is dear to Krishna, Gita Karya also, Saketi, like, in the fourth adhyaya, he says that, because you are my friend, I am revealing this to you. So Arjuna has that knack of being an amazing student. Whatever knowledge is thrown at him, he converts that into a finely accomplished skill. That is where in the end of the Bhagavad-Gita we see that, right? Yatra Yogeshwaraha Krishna, Yatra Parthaha Dhanurdharaha. Dhanurdhara is not just holding that Pashupatastra, Brahmastra in the hand. Dhanuru, basically any Vidya, that's a skill. He he holds everything as an Astra. He can use it the right things at the most appropriate time. That's Arjuna. So all the complicated knowledge will be useless if we don't try to become little bit of Arjuna, which is basically essentially Shravana, Manana, Vididhyasana. The amount of tapasyas that Arjuna does, be it in the Aranya Parva, Vana Parva, or be it later, Arjuna is amazing when it comes to in the Virata Parva. I mean, Brihannada, the state of Brihannada is not easy, right? I mean, look at Dhananjaya, look at Parantapa as the adjective for Arjuna, and look at the kind of Napumsaka role that he plays. Like, a dancer. He was a dancer, he was a dance teacher. Now, and where is dance coming for an amazingly skillful archer? He knows that also. He knows Nati Shastra also, right? So Arjuna is that crazy character. He's amazing. When you look at his Mula Amsha, Bhagavan Indra, Indra is another amazing character, right? I mean, he is Mahavishnu's favorite. He is a Surendra. Though he has those occasional slipping up characters, Vali, when you look at Vali, Vali is also Indra Amsha, right? Mahabharata. Vali, he toyed with Ravana. I mean, we know those stories, right? He tied Ravana to his tail, Vala, and he took him for a joyride. Like, so Vali, Indra Amsha is very peculiar, amazing Amsha. Arjuna is that Indra Amsha, right? Whatever knowledge, in simplistic sense, it's a Shravana Manana Vididhyasana. You throw a knowledge at him, he will convert that into an amazingly accomplished skill. And and it's good for us, right? When we look at that gunatmaka sense of Arjuna, it's important for us who try to gain little bit from him, right? Say, hey Arjuna, ati ashnataha cha ati swapnashilasya yogaha na asti. Okay, one who eats a lot, okay, one who sleeps a lot, for him there is no yogyata. He will never become a yogya person. Anashnataha cha ekantam tu na asti. If you don't eat also, you don't have ekanta. No, that ekagra, ekanta, ekabhakti, that solitude. We spoke about that, right, in the one of the previous shlokas, when we, I think, shloka number, uh, you know, 9 or something like that, where he says, like, tatah, sorry, what is that? Yogi yunjita satatam atmanam rahasi sthitah ekaki yata chittatma, ekaki. So ekanta. So that ekanta, even if you do anashtatah, if you give up all your food, if you give up eating at all, there is no ekanta, there is no yoga. Nacha jagrapah eva. If you constantly do not sleep also, there is no yoga for you, there is no ekanta for you. Now these are some of the habits. Now Dhyana, he explains what kind of a place to sit, how to erect our body, what kind of chakras to activate, how to what to give up in terms of some of those abhiniveshas and things like that, viparyaya and things like that. He goes up and up and up, right? He goes up and up. Now here he's explaining some of the regular habits. Now look at this. What is Arjuna having in the middle of the battlefield? See, ashnataha, eating. Eating, when we see eating food, right? Eating food is basically the food is the ultimate sense experience. Yeah, and I think I'm repeating this quite often in these sessions. See, a good food is something that is good to see. A good food is something good to hear. Most of our onomatopoeia, like the words that sound for their expression, like soup. Like the sound of soup is like the sound itself is a word. soup, or slurp, or burp, like crunchy, crackling, like all of these words when you see, they're all sounds associated with food, and they're all onomatopoeia. They because sound is an essential part of crunchy dosa. Like we want to say that, right? So sound is an essential quality of a good food. A crackling papad. Like so it need to have that nice, slurpy rasam. Like so you want to associate some nice sound also with the food, right? So there is something good to see when you see master chef and all. It's all about presentability. A good food has to be amazingly presentable. Vibrant colors are very important. When you see all the food ads, they add colors primarily to make them appear, vibrant and things like that. So food, when we eat, that is the ultimate sense experience. There is something good to see. There is something good to hear. There is something good to smell. Not so pleasant smell in a food is not consumable. And of course, the taste is something nice. It doesn't end there. Even the sparsha, the touch should also be adequately pleasant. I can't have a cold masala dosa. I can't have a hot ice cream, right? Ice cream has to be cold. Though masala dosa has to be hot. The minute masala dosa becomes cold, it doesn't taste good enough. That heat, the food also, that heat has to be so sparsha. The touch should also. Food is essentially amazing sense experience. So when we say na ashnataha, basically chesta, like your activities, your sense experiences, your sense activities, you can't cut off. You can't cut off your actions. When you cut off all your actions, there is no yoga for you. And when you get too indulgent in sense activities, there is no yoga for you. Na anashnatah ekantam asti, na ashnatah ati ashnatah yoga asti. Similarly, sleep. Sleep, Jagarana Swapna, right? Now, this is something very beautifully Krishna brought out as a reference in the second Adhyaya. Yamisha Sarva Bhutanam Tasyam Jagarti Sanyami. Yasyam Jagrati Bhutani Samisha Pashyato Mune. Right? Where uh, every living being is seeing the Nisha, time to sleep. The yogi, Muni, he is finding it to be a Jagarana city. No, we are awake. And I think the example I quoted at that time was perhaps of some of our mothers. You get into the house even at 12 in the midnight, 1 in the midnight. They have a sense. They know who is coming home. Like no, they have that cat kind of a sense they possess. Extremely sensitive there. That is the yoga. That is the state of yoga. Like they sleep like a dog. Dogs when they sleep on the road, they are absolutely awake. They are absolutely aware where they are. They don't completely shut down themselves, right? So so basically where people are all distracted, retracted back into their shells, the Swapna Loka, yogis are Jagrata. So this Jagarana Swapna also, na, na cha ati Swapna Shilasya Yoga asti, na Jagrataha chatu ekantamashti. Like, you have to sleep also, you have to take rest also, but you can't completely be, gone into deep sleep or, completely get disconnected. Yoga is the constant state of being away, being giving to the, being in a state of giving to the rest, being part of the sense experiences and staying away from any bit of indulgences to the sense. So, very beautiful shloka. The more and more we contemplate upon this, the multiple different interpretations can come, but we will quickly see what Aurobindo says for this, right? Verily, this yoga is not for him who eats too much or sleeps too much, even as it is not for him who gives up sleep completely on food completely. Many people quote this to say that no, Krishna does not promote Ekadashi, Nirjala, Nirahara. Now we need to understand this. Nirjala, Nirahara we do for that one particular day. So it is not Anashnataha at all. This anashnataha for that particular reason. And there are benefits of giving the food for one full day. There are different benefits of that because the food in our intestinal tract and things like that, it takes 48 hours to completely get ejected. So it's like a cleaning cycle. It is not anashnataha. Anashnataha may be for that particular moment. That way, between every meal also we are anashnataha, right? We can't say that is the state of anashnataha. The time window of observation is also equally important. If the entire food cycle from consumption to the complete ejection and assimilation is about 48 hours plus, Okay, then the window of observation should be minimum 48 hours. And in that, if we are staying without food for 36 hours, that shouldn't be counted as anashmata, right? So I think people, there are instances where people quote this shloka and say, oh, Krishna does not testify to fasting, Nirahara fasting, Nirjala fasting. He doesn't testify. So, again, not to completely shoot them down. Those of us who want to really practice, there is no harm. If you really consider the appropriate time window for observation, I think this is all fine. Right? So very simple one. Basically, it says it is touching upon some of the ways in which. So again, from Arjuna's perspective, he can't be without sense experiences. He can't be without his karma. He can't be without his chesta. He can't give up the war. He has to be in the war, but engage adequately. Don't get too indulgent in the sense experiences. Looking at the Suhruda, Mitra, Ari, all of that nine different types of people, right? Bandhushu, all of them, look at them with equal equanimity. Don't get indulgent in your relationship with them. Just go proceed with your war, proceed with your duty, because that's the Paramatma. That's the Bhagavad Adhina Karya. Do it for the sake of that. Again, contextually, that is the importance. I think perhaps makes sense for all of us, right? So we now move on to the next shloka. One moment, I'm struggling with the. Ah, okay. Next shloka number 17, reads like this. युक्ताहारविहारस्य युक्तचेष्टस्य कर्मसु युक्तस्वप्नावबोधस्य योगो भवति दुःखः युक्ताहारविहारस्य युक्तचेष्टस्य कर्मसु युक्तस्वप्न अवबोधस्य योगो भवति दुःखः the padacheda yukta ahara viharasya yukta chestasya karmasu yukta swapna avabodhasya yogaha bhavati dukkhaha. When we put them into the prose order, we will see the Anvaya. Anvaya says, hey Arjuna, yukta swapna, yukta avabodhasya, yukta ahara viharasya, yukta karmasu chestasya, yogaha dukkhaha bhavati. What does that mean? Hey Arjuna, you need to click on dictionary, right? Yukta swapna avabodhasya. One who is yukta. Yukta is adequate, engaged properly in swapna and avabodhana, in sleep and waking. And one who is yukta ahara viharasya, one who is adequately engaged, wholesome and proper in yoga, in ahara and vihara, food and recreation, right? And who is yukta karmasu, chestasya karmasu, like one who is adequately yukta, one who is adequately engaged in all the activities. Karmasu, chestasya karmasu. Okay, for him who is yukta in putting forth of effort in work, chestasya karmasu. Yoga dukkha bhavati. For such a person, his yoga, his state of yoga, dukkha bhavati. Dukkha is dukkham hanti. Dukkha is the destroyer of all the dukkha bhavati. Right? So one who is yukta in his swapna avabodhana, in his sleep and awakefulness, one who is yukta in ahara vihara, one who is yukta in all his chestasya karmas, in all his efforts towards action. Okay, when he is yukta, yukta is adequately engaged. One way of looking at yukta is, see, in Sanskrit we have a beautiful word, right? Yatha, anatikramya, like yatheshta, ishtam anatikramya, yathecha, icha anatikramya. No, not too much, not too less, necessary sufficient. We put the condition, right? Whenever we solve mathematical solution problems, necessary sufficient. So that is the condition we try to invoke. Yukta is that, adequate, not too much, not too less. No, na ati ashnatah yoga asti, na cha anashnatah ekantam yoga asti. Na अति स्वप्नशीलस्य योगः अस्ति न च जागृतः योगः एकान्तम् अस्ति. That's why yukta, it has to be adequate. That's what he like a corollary from the previous shloka. It's a continued message, right? So from the previous shloka when we see. Right? So let's see what Aurobindo says for this. Aurobindo interpretation. Yoga destroys the sorrow for him in whom the sleep and waking, the food and the play, the putting forth of effort in work are all yukta. Now, what is yukta? See, this is interesting, right? What is yukta? Adequately engaged. Uh, when we see Ramanujacharya's commentary, he constantly uses the word mita. This yukta, according to Ramanuja Bhashya, is mita, limited. What is limited? I think Vedanta Deshika, he explains that, when we eat the food in our stomach, right? For example, in our stomach, half the space is for food. Okay, in Tulu, those of us who know Tulu, naturally our concept of full is are. Are is half. We say banjare. We don't say banji full. We say banjare. It is basically half stomach, and that's how we have to eat. I suppose, many shastra, there are some pramanas for that, right? When we eat the food, our stomach has to be half. It shouldn't be full, right? In the remaining half, the other half that is left over, in that one half of that, which is one quarter of the stomach, is for the water, and another half, which is another quarter of the stomach, is for the air. That is how I think this is something that Vedanta Deshikacharya has explained further, which is basically expounding on the word mita. Right? That is how it has to be seen. But I think, see, this is beauty of Bhagavad-Gita. Wherever there is something to be explained in a little more detailed fashion, uh, and if the definition is not self-explanatory, either Arjuna will prod further and ask for clarification, or Gita Acharya himself will say that. And for this word yukta, he will explain what is yukta in the next shloka. So that's why we click on next and we look at the next shloka. The next shloka, it says like this, right? Yada viniyatam chittam atmanyevavatishtate nispruha sarva kamebhyo yukta ityuchyate tada. Yada viniyatam chittam atmani evavatishtate nispruha sarva kamebhyo yukta ityuchyate tada. When we do the padacheta, we get this. Yada viniyatam chittam atmani eva avatishtate nispruha sarva kamebhya yukta iti uchyate tada. What does the unjumbling prose order give us in the Anvaya? Hey Arjuna, yada viniyatam chittam sarvam kamebhya nispruha atmani eva avatishtate tada yukta iti uchyate. Who is called yukta? What is the state of yukta? That is being defined here. Right? When we click on dictionary, hey Arjuna, yada, as and when, viniyatam chittam, visheshataha niyatam, niyama, visheshataha niyatam, nicely controlled chitta, perfectly controlled consciousness, beautifully explained here in this recital, perfectly. That visheshataha has been nicely brought out. Perfectly controlled consciousness or nicely controlled chitta, sarva kamebhya nispraha, being completely liberated, or nispraha is basically without any asakti in all types of desire or longing for desire. There sarva kamebhya nispraha. Okay, atmani eva avatishtati. In the self alone he remains still. Avatishtati. So finds happiness within. That deepam jyoti, inside the self, right? I think we spoke enough about this. So, tada yukta iti uchyati. Then he is called as yukta. Yukta, yukti, capability, adequacy, nicely engaged. That mita. I think all of these words will then converge when we look at this from this perspective. Right? So yukta is also yukta hara is basically you don't seek pleasure in the eating. You eat for what it's worth. Not for, like, for example, I like this dosa, some special dosa is made at home. Now, I don't need to quell my hunger anymore. But I'm eating more and more. Some 20 dosas I continue belting only because I like it. No, but no, if you are yukta, you are basically sarva kamebhya nispruha atmani avatishtaha. You stay happy in your own self. Well, do we need food? Yes, of course we need food. How much do you know? As much as to stay ungrowling state, right? Do we need sleep? Of course we need sleep. How much? As long as my wakefulness is back to full glory. Just the recharge. We just need the recharge. Okay, do we need to stay awake? Yes, of course we all need to stay awake. Do we need to do action? Yes, of course we need to do action. So, yukta ahara vihara, yukta cheshtasu karmasu. Yukta cheshtasu karmasu, nice word, right? You can't give up actions also, very pertinent to Arjuna. Your yoga has to be in that yukta karma chesasu, yukta ahara vihareshu. You have to be in constant state of yukta, where you are happy within. You are doing them as an incidental activity for something else, right? That is the basic meaning. Now, come back to urban interpretation. When all the mental consciousness, the so holistic mental consciousness is perfectly controlled and liberated from longingness and desire and remains still and content within self. Then it is said to be yukta. And this is the funny part, right? In the previous shloka, the translator retained yukta as a non-translatable. Here he is translating it to yoga. He is in yoga. He is yukta. Because he spoke about yukta in this shloka, Bhagavan Sri Krishna, Yoga Gita Charya, he is defining yukta. What is yukta? Right? We will see the next shloka. Oh, beautiful shloka. Shloka number 19. Right? Yatha deepo nivatastho negate sopama smrita yogino yata chittasya yunjato yogamatmanaha. So again, see, one thing we need to understand is overcoming the Chipta Vritti, overcoming the Mudha Vritti, overcoming the Vikshipta Vritti. We are now continuing to stay in the focusing on the state of Ekagrata, in the Anahata Chakra, towards that Siddhesha, thinking about Bhagavad Para, Bhagavad Chitta. I think that should be kept in mind, right? All of this is happening in that state, in the Dhyana state where we have done that. Now, continued state in that, right? Yatha deepo nivatastho negate sopama smrita yoginaha yata chittasya yunjato yogamatmanaha. What does the Padacheda give us? Yatha deepaha nivatastha negate sopama smrita yoginaha yata chittasya yunjataha yogam atmanaha. Right? Again, continuous state of ekagrata focus. Tatraekagam manah kritva. Continue to think of Bhagavat Amsha, right? What does that mean? First, we will see the Anvaya. Hey Arjuna, yatha nivatastha deepaha na ingate atmanah yogam yunjataha yata chittasya yoginaha sa upama smrita. What does that mean? Sounded nice, but we will click on dictionary now to get the meaning of it, right? When we see dictionary, Yatha Nivatastha Deepa, just like the Deepa in the Nivatastha, which is situated in the Nivata kind of a place, without Vata, without Vayu, windless place. Just like how the Deepa, the lamp, just like the lamp in a windless place, Na Ingate, does not flicker. Just, just like how the lamp in a windless place does not flicker. Yunjataha Yata Chittasya, the one who is practicing yoga, yunjataha, okay, the one who is constantly practicing, yogi, yata chittasya, of that self-controlled person, yata chittasya, self-conscious, self-controlled person, yoginaha, of that yogi, upama smrita, is the analogy that is being stated, you remember, which is basically in the state of ekagrata, you continue to yatachittasya, continue to focus on self-control, Bhagavat Prati, Chintana, Matparaha, Matchittaha, he spoke, right? The simile need to be drawn there is the way the chitta, yatachitta is basically the chitta vritti, completely the stillness of the consciousness will become like that lamp in the windless place. That's the simile, that's the analogy to be drawn. When you continue to stay in this state of yoga, when you continue to stay in the state of ekagrata, when you continue to keep on thinking about that anahata chakra, which is the hriddesha, where the Bhagavat is sitting, the Bhagavat is that Bhagavan who is the sarva yajna tapasam bhoktaraha, he is the sarva loka maheshwaraha, he is the sarva bhutanam suhrit. When we constantly think about that, nirdosham hi samam brahma, when we look at all those qualities, good qualities of Bhagavat, continue to think about that, then the consciousness, continued state of that, then our chitta, yata chitta, prayatna yata chitta, with a lot of effort, our chitta will become Gunatmaka Samsara. We will become absolutely unflickering, just like how the the lamp in a windless place is seated, Stitaha. Okay, Nivata Stitaha, Nivatastaha, Nivata Pradeshe Stitaha. What the lamp situated in a place which is absolutely windless. Now, this is very interesting, right? And what is the state that we get into? We will see. Because after Ekagrata, when you look at the five Manovritti, the next state is naturally Niruddha state. I think that is what we get into. Niruddha state is the state where you continue to stay in the state of Ekagrata. You will reach that Niruddha state, which is the Nirvikalpa, without any material bondage, beyond the material bondage. Asam Prajnata Samadhi, the way we call it. That's the state of Niruddha. So Sahasrara, activation of the Sahasrara Chakra on the top, the Shivoham kind of a thing, right? Sahasrara is where Shiva, absolute Shiva, that is residing there. Okay, to become there, we have to continue focusing on that Anahata, focusing on that Parabrahma, focusing on that Paramatma, to the extent where the Chitta becomes absolutely still, just like how the Deepa stays unflickering in a windless place. Now, this is very interesting, right? When we think of Deepa in a windless place, literally speaking, it doesn't exist. Deepa can be protected from the wind, but it cannot stay in a windless place, because in a windless place means there is no oxygen. Without oxygen, the lamp will not forget flickering. It will not even glow. This is known, right? The known fact is that when it is beyond the material plane, absolute windlessness is beyond the material plane. When we go beyond the material plane, that doesn't happen. So the Niruddha state, that unflickeringness of the Deepa, has to be seen as the perhaps. I mean, this is my view, right? Again, I should put that disclaimer here. This is my view. This should be the aspirational one end of the continuum. That Niruddha state is the far end of the continuum. What we will achieve is somewhere close to that. And how do we achieve that? The analogy being drawn by some of the great commentators like Jnaneshwar and all for this particular shloka. See, we all have that experience. At least when I was a small kid, we used to have this milk booth. We had to go to the milk booth and carry the water. Sorry, carry the milk in a container, in a jar container, which has a handle, a steel handle, the steel container. When we bring that, right, the biggest challenge for me whenever I used to bring that is, can I bring that without a spill? Now, can we avoid the spill when we walk? No. Can we avoid the shaking of the milk inside the can? No. Can we avoid the turbulence? No. What do? We try to balance it. We try to reduce. It's a deliberate activity. We try to keep it as though the turbulence is minimized, as though the turbulence is negated. Nivatastha, there is no place which is Nivata. Vata is there. The best we can do is we can control the speed of the wind from affecting the Deepa. That is all we can try to do. Put put it next to the wall, protect it with a shield, cover it with a hand. We do different things to reduce the flickeringness, because the more it flickers, the chances of that being put out is complete. So Niruddha state is like that. Nivasasta kind of a state is Niruddha. It perhaps is aspirational. We will never achieve that. Complete activation of the Sahasrara is not possible. Like in our high school, one of the teachers used to always say, if you want to climb up the tree, aim at the skies. Now, aiming at the skies doesn't mean that we can ever reach the skies, but at least we can climb the top of the tree, right? So, Niruddha perhaps is that aspirational target, right? Far end, where when you reach the state, it's almost like Nivasastha, but physically we know that it's very difficult to overcome that. So, Asam Prajnata, we can perhaps get glimpses of that Nirvikalpa Samadhi Sthiti, Asam Prajnata Samadhi Sthiti, Niruddha Sthiti, whatever term we want to call it, they're all the same. But eventually they are still in the material plane, right? Are we talking about Niruddha? Is this shloka something to do with Niruddha? I think so, because the next shloka talks about Niruddha state. And we will not look into it now. We will adjourn for the day today. But before we do that, a request, if anybody wants to come up on stage and add any bit of interpretation shortcomings that would have come from me, knowingly, unknowingly, please to come up and share hear your views. In the meanwhile, I am reading the Aurobindo interpretation for this shloka. Motionless like the light of a lamp in a windless place, he is the controlled consciousness, free from its restless action, shut in from its outward motion of the yogi who practices union with the self, who continues to practice union with the self. The way I see the continued state from anahata, once we activate the anahata chakra, continue to stay put in that state where from that state we will start activating the samprajnata samadhi, the savikalpa samadhi, and then move up and up and up and up towards the state where potentially we will get sparks of the nirvikalpa samadhi, sparks of the niruddha sthiti, sparks of the vivatasta belief, but we perhaps will never be reaching that state of Nivasa. Right? That's something that I would like to say. But yeah, this is a good analogy. And again, this analogy is brilliant. Nivasastha, I think, we cannot do much other than going down to Bhagavan Vyasa Maharshi, Bhagavan Krishna, both Gita Acharya Krishna as well as Dvaipayana, Krishna Dvaipayana Vyasa. So we should bow down to them for such brilliant analogies. The Nivasastha, such a beautiful one. Many a times when we gloss over English translations, we will get to feel that that windlessness state is available. But when we look into it deeply, windlessness is not a state. There is nothing called windlessness. Right? Physically, we can only reduce the impact, and that is the still yata chitta state that we need to get into. Right? So that brings us to the last shloka of Chintana for today. We will continue from shloka number 20. I think we spent a little extra time on these few shlokas because they are loaded. Because at least for me, the more and more I look at these shlokas, there is a lot of deeper meaning that is hidden in these. Going forward, I think we can perhaps get back to our usual run rate of about 10 plus shlokas every session. So next week, next Saturday, we will continue from shloka number 20. That is where the Niruddha state is very beautifully explained. So this is until now we saw how to continue to stay in state of yoga to reach the Niruddha state. I think next shloka he mentions it is the Niruddha state and what are the benefits of it. Right? We will see that. And very clearly there is no one-time achievement of the destination. We have to remain there. It's difficult, not just reaching there, that's important. Remaining there is more important. I think more of gems of wisdom coming from Krishna towards that will be seen in the next few shlokas. Thanks everyone for joining us in this journey. Let's conclude now on the reverse count of three. Hope to see you all more often with more and more prayasa we do in terms of learning Gita fundamentals in as much honesty as possible. So let's conclude now. 3, 2, 1. Mukopi yat prasadena mukunda shayanayate rajarajayate rikto radhavendram tamashraye Bharati Ramana Mukhya Pranam Tarata Shri Gopala Krishna Priyata Shri Krishna Arpanamastu. Have a beautiful Sunday, everyone. Have a beautiful week ahead. Jai Shri Krishna.
Jai Shri Krishna.
Jai Shri